Hello, everyone. How are you? I hope that everyone's having a wonderful week. I hope everyone has been enjoying their football. I hope everyone has been just really enjoying life in general because things are looking pretty good in terms of the world of football. And everyone is going to have their little caveats and their little things that they're going to be complaining about here and there. I will tend to focus on the Copa America as there's lots of people talking about the Euros, and not that I don't want to talk about the Euros. I think they've been quite the compelling tournament. It's just that I haven't seen enough of that tournament to truly have a well-educated opinion about every single one of the teams. Of course, the big teams are quite evident in their respective type of play. But in order to give a better lens of what's gone on, I would have to have seen each and every single one of the games, and I have not. So what I end up doing is, in this particular episode, talking about Peru. I really have enjoyed the past few years seeing the Peruvian national team. I have truly enjoyed seeing Peru at the height of their powers. And it seems like they're about to teeter and fail and not be able to qualify for the World Cup, and then all of a sudden they do well. Now, there's two things to be looking at when it comes to this Peruvian side. If you look at all the way to, I want to say 2011, thereabouts, it's a team that has been able to persevere. It's been a team that in these types of formats can do very well. Now, many of you who haven't seen Peru, save for the 2018 World Cup, would say, well, they didn't do too well. They didn't do too well when it came to results. But when it came to the actual performance, I don't think they disappointed from a competitive standpoint. They're a very competitive team. They're a team that can offer a lot in terms of what a squad can truly bring out. Not a lot of superstars. I don't think there's any, if you really want to force me, at this stage of their career. Not even Paulo Guerrero, at this stage, at 37 years of age, can be considered a superstar. Although he is in certain regions. In Brazil, he has been considered that. But not anymore, for obvious reasons. He's been more injured than he's been on the pitch, so that has a lot to do with it. And Jefferson Farfan, who's a very well-known commodity, but I wouldn't also label him as such. So it's been a collection of different parts and pieces that have been able to truly begin to emerge as one footballing force. A team that is complicated Brazil, a team that has complicated many other sides in Europe when they played in friendlies. They've complicated teams like Argentina, like Colombia. They've been able to do that. And rightfully, you start looking at them and you start saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, this is a team to be reckoned with. And okay, let me back up a little bit. If you started looking at Peru during World Cup qualifying play in October, November, you'd say they're pretty much done and dusted. You thought that it was over. You thought that it was history. You thought that this team was not going to qualify for the World Cup. Although it seems pretty premature to start saying that with 4 matches out of 18. I don't know. What do you think? What say you? To me, you really begin to see that, and it ends up being one of these topics that really transcends and really sees the evolution and sees where the tinkering needs to be done. It's not tinkering that Ricardo Gareca does for the sake of tinkering, you know what I'm saying? It's tinkering with the idea of, okay, how far can this player take me? How far can this concept or this player within this concept take me? Or this group of players, or switching from a back line of 4 to a back line of 5, or having other new players come in. And that's going to be a topic that I delve into in just a couple, to see exactly where this team can go and how far it can go in this current generation. Well, it seemed to have resurrected something in them, because in this Copa America, they were a team that was extremely competitive. They were a team that were getting results, although I mentioned it a lot when I was on Sports Max, talking about how Peru just needed a win. And that win against Ecuador kind of brought a bit of momentum, although You could say that door got slammed shut in their face when they played Brazil and got blown out, but that tends to be the norm with Peru in those types of situations. They got blown out in the previous version of this Copa America against Brazil and then played a pretty competitive final, if I may say so. Then, of course, this happens, and then the second time that they end up playing against Brazil, you can say they were competitive. They needed a little extra push, that little extra bit of motivation to try and go through. So I can safely say that if there was that, maybe things could have been a little bit different. Maybe, just maybe, I don't know. But when you start to push Brazil, sometimes they have a problem pushing back. Although they don't push back, they kind of just stand their ground and end up picking up their blocks and being able to close things off with a little bit more conviction, if you will. And that's been one of the solid aspects of Chichi in this phase that he's been as a coach, that he's been offering that. But I digress from that. You start looking at certain players, you start looking at the Pedro Galeses, and Galese was just absolutely brilliant. There were probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 goalkeepers that were better than him in this tournament, but that doesn't mean that he was bad. That just means that there were 3 or 4 goalkeepers that had to do a lot more in order to be able to keep their teams in check, that were able to keep their teams in a competitive situation. But that's not taking anything away from Pedro Galese, who had a sensational match against Brazil. Aldo Corso, another player that happened to be very brilliant throughout the entire tournament. Anderson Santamaria, Cristian Ramos, Alexander Callens, who filled in. He wasn't the starter all the time, but whenever he was called upon by Ricardo Gareca, the central defender's been quite good. And Miguel Trauco also, maybe not the Miguel Trauco of old. Not saying that he's old, I'm just saying that in previous competitions, he's been much more of a attacking piece for Peru. Didn't happen to be exactly that at this stage, but that is part of what he brings. Probably the best player, or one of the best players, because you can make a lot of arguments, it came from the midfield. You look at Renato Tapia, you look at Josimar Yotun, you look at Cristian Cueva, you start looking at Sergio Peña. Those are the players that, from the front up is where you start to see where the players really were able to shine. To me, all 4 of them, more than the defense to a certain extent, and I'm not trying to minimize the effort that the defense made, you start to see that this team showed a great deal of composure, that they were able to show a great deal of discipline, and also a great deal of tenacity. You see that combination really come to the fray. That midfield was sensational throughout the entire tournament. And add to that they were able to feed off Gianluca Lapadula up top and really become this side that many start looking at as a team that could fight for World Cup qualifying spots after all. And that's what makes this team so compelling and so enjoyable and such a joy to watch at times, because they have that, as I mentioned, the grit, the intensity, but also the technical capability that they can match up with anyone in South America from a technical standpoint. And that's Peruvian DNA right there. That shows you exactly what they can and can't do. And to me, there's a great deal. I can't say long term, because if you look at Lapadula, he's 29 going on 30, something like that. Sergio Peña isn't a young pup. Santiago Ormeño will be an interesting proposition going into the future. You have players like Luis Abram and Wilder Cartagena also that come in. Iberico's also a player that seems very promising. But with Peru, you can't talk. Well, then again, with South America, you can't talk about long term. Maybe Ecuador is the exception to that rule, and we'll talk about them in a future episode. But when it comes to Peru, you always have to talk about middle term. Next year, next 2 years. What is Peru going to be able to offer going into Qatar 2022 and maybe into the next Copa America in 2024? Yeah, 2024. It's kind of like, okay, wait, they played in 2020. They were supposed to, they didn't, but okay, you kind of catch my drift. So When it comes to this Peruvian side, it's a project that is there. It's a project that the players know they can do a great deal with. They know that there's a nucleus in place. Now, how long will that nucleus be in place? Who knows? Because not a lot of young players are coming down the pipeline. And that's one of the worrying things. And again, it's not just Peru. It's endemic throughout South American football for a bunch of reasons. It's not one particular reason why young players aren't coming out in droves like they were before. But again, like I said, we can talk about that in depth and you can get a better understanding as to why in a future episode. But to me, Peru has a very bright future, at least a middle term that seems very bright. Because not only did they start finding new players, they found new options that they no longer had to depend on one or two players to come to the national team, or if not, their goose was cooked. You start looking at a national team that now has different options, that now depend on other players, that now depend more importantly on each other more than ever to be able to qualify and get the success and acquire the success that they need to have in order to repeat in a World Cup. And that shows a great deal of promise. To me, that's where this road is going to take them. Now, will they qualify to a World Cup? I don't know. That's a very good question, but it does make South American qualifying all that more interesting in the months and FIFA dates to come.